So let's start. There's a couple different ways to approach this. So the difference between recreation therapy and play therapy. Let's look at it, let's just say from a facilities perspective. What's distinctive to play therapy that isn't in recreational therapy? Just the setting, what it would look like. Did I lose you?
No,
oh, okay.
Well, I know the rec therapy is a bit more structured. And,
Actually, no, it's the other way.
So the play therapy is more structured.
Yes.
With, using yes, recreation as a modality for increasing retention of whatever you're doing. But I know that play therapists have a number of assessments related to that.
So play therapy is very specific. Recreational therapy is very broad.
Okay.
That's the first thing. Recreational... Yes, I know a lot of people do. That's why it's important to clarify. So recreational therapy is any recreational activity that is being used with, and I'm not quoting ATRA, I'm just trying to do it off the top of my head. I should probably quote it from ATRA, but is being used in an intentional way to achieve biopsychosocial goals in some sort of measurable way. But it can be any recreational activity for any population. Play therapy is very specifically mostly geared for pre-verbal populations, especially up to about 9 to 11 years old, or others at that level of functioning. It tends to have a very set way of setting up a room with a very specific layout and very specific toys and activities that are in there, and a very specific way that the play therapist interacts with the patient, with the client. Whereas a recreational therapist can work in many ways. There's a whole sliding progression of the recreational therapist starts very much in charge, and then as the client grows in knowledge and experience, the recreational therapist goes from full therapist director to more of a facilitator to more of just kind of an oversight. And so you have an increase of responsibility by the client and a decrease in responsibility by the therapist in recreation therapy. With play therapy, the play therapist is supposed to just be as hands-off as possible the entire process, and take lots of notes and observe, and get the child to open up and communicate through the play methodology, because they're pre-verbal, using dolls and drawings and paintings and whatever, and go through the interpretive process, etc. there. But it's a very highly structured and very limited approach. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't say limited in a negative way. It's just that it's a very specifically spelled out approach to working with a fairly narrow population to reveal various things that pre-verbal populations would have trouble communicating otherwise. It's beyond their tool set to explain through speech, but through their play, they're able to illustrate frustrations, potential abuse, and other issues that they may be having through these play activities. So I went through a number of workshops and was part of the play therapy group for a while, and was surprised at some of the similarities, but quite a few of the differences. What's interesting is it's easier to bill a lot of money for play therapy as opposed to it's challenging as a recreational therapist. But so something that I've highlighted, play therapy matches the dynamic inner structure of the child with an equally dynamic approach. The challenge is that children have such dynamic internal experiences that are so varied that it's difficult to try to cover all of them. And let's see, this is a lot about the person. Little children seldom, if ever, evaluate the lives of other little children. They tend not to have that broader concept of theory of mind, is still developing. Although there's early steps of that, obviously in early phases, that there's a little bit of it there, but it takes a while to really develop. Here is a little piece from A. Pecci for 1979, Principles for Relationships with Children. It's in a poem form, if you will. I am not all-knowing, therefore I will not even attempt to be. I need to be loved, therefore I will be open to loving children. I want to be more accepting of the child in me, therefore I will with wonder and awe allow children to illuminate my world. I know so little about the complex intricacies of childhood, therefore I will allow children to teach me. I learn best from and am impacted most by my personal struggles, therefore I will join the children in their struggles. I sometimes need a refuge, therefore I will provide a refuge for children. I like it when I am fully accepted as the person I am, therefore I will strive to experience and appreciate the person of the child. So, it's very much Rogers and all the others there. I make mistakes. They are a declaration of the way I am, human and fallible. Therefore, I will be tolerant of the humanness of children. I react with emotional internalization and expression to my world of reality. Therefore, I will relinquish the grasp I have on reality and try to enter the world as experienced by the child. It feels good to be an authority to provide answers. Therefore, I will need to work hard to protect children from me. I am more fully me when I feel safe, therefore I will be consistent in my interactions with children. I am the only person who can live my life, therefore I will not attempt to rule a child's life. I have learned most of what I know from experiencing, therefore I will allow children to experience. The hope I experience and the will to live come from within me, therefore I will recognize and affirm the child's will and selfhood. I cannot make children's hurts and fears and frustrations and disappointments go away, therefore I will soften the blow. I experience fear when I am vulnerable, therefore I will with kindness, gentleness, and tenderness touch the inner world of the vulnerable child. So that's a little bit of a mantra that this author, Gary L. Landreth, from Play Therapy, The Art of Relationship, 3rd edition, likes to cite. The key thing is, we've talked before about play and how it shapes the brain, opens the imagination, invigorates the soul, Stuart Brown and such. We've talked about that, right? Just the general importance of play. If certain animals like dogs and such don't get it, they get psychotic, etc. Same thing happens. Universal importance of play to the natural development and wholeness of children has been underscored by the UN proclamation of play as a universal and inalienable right of childhood. Play is the singular central activity of childhood, occurring at all times and in all places. Children do not need to be taught how to play, nor must they be made to play. Play is spontaneous, usually enjoyable, voluntary, and not goal-directed. In order to make children's play more acceptable, some adults have invented a meaning for play by defining it as work. In their push to be successful and to hurry up the process of growing up, many adults cannot tolerate the waste of children's time by playing. The attitude is that children must be accomplishing something or working toward some important goal acceptable to adults. So this is where the LRI assessment kind of determines what attitudes have been inculcated into them from society and parents and such, whether they believe that recreation and leisure time is acceptable or whether it's a waste of time. Children communicate through play. Children's play can be more fully appreciated when recognized as their natural medium of communication. Children express themselves more fully and more directly through self-initiated, spontaneous play than they do verbally because they are more comfortable with play. So this is, again, up to about 9 to 11 years old. And again, varies on developmental level, but that's generally the recommendation is to stop doing play therapy around 9 or 10, 11 years old. For example, below age 10 to 12, most children experience difficulty sitting still for sustained periods of time. Young child has to make a conscious effort to sit still, and thus creative energy is consumed in focusing on non-productive activity. Play therapy provides for children's need to be physically active. In play, children discharge energy, prepare for life's duties, achieve difficult goals, and relieve frustrations. They get physical contact, discharge their needs to compete, act aggressively in socially acceptable ways, and learn to get along with others. Play helps children give their imaginations free rein, learn the trappings of their culture, and develop skills. As children play, they're expressing the individuality of their personalities and drawing upon the inner resources that can become incorporated into their personalities. So Play as a medium of exchange, and restricting children to verbal expression automatically places a barrier to the therapeutic relationship by imposing limitations that in effect say to children, you must come up to my level of communication and communicate with words. The therapist's responsibility is to go to a child's level and communicate with children through the medium with which they are comfortable. Why must the child accommodate the adult? The therapist is the one who is supposed to be well-adjusted, to have developed coping skills, to know how to communicate effectively at all levels, and to possess a developmental understanding of children. When the therapist says, tell me about it, young children are placed at a disadvantage of having to accommodate the therapist. When there's no immediate danger, it's usually best to approve a child's play without interference just because they're so engrossed in it. Play in a therapeutic process. Again, I'm picking my highlights here. Play is a voluntary, intrinsically motivated, you've heard me use that over and over and over, activity involving flexibility of choice in determining how an item is used. No extrinsic goals exist. The process of play is usually enjoyed, and the end product is less important. Play involves the child's physical, mental, and emotional self in creative expression and can involve social interactions. Play therapy is defined as a dynamic interpersonal relationship between a child or any person of any age and a therapist trained in play therapy procedures who provides selected play materials. So notice that selected play materials, and facilitates the development of a safe relationship for the child or person of any age to fully express and explore their self, feelings, thoughts, experiences, and behaviors through play, the child's natural medium of communication for optimal growth and development. So it's a very selected way. So they literally have diagrams of how you should set up a playroom. So we did that. We had to do the whole observed. We actually did workshops with children through play therapy and such. And the rooms are set up in very specific ways. You have the art, drawing, a painting board over here. You have the box of toys over here. You have shelves of toys over here. And there's a very specific layout that you actually set up the room, the play therapy room. And then you basically sit back on the chair, and every time they try to engage you into playing with them, you let them do the play. You keep using terms to redirect them to enjoying, letting them enjoy their own time. Let's see if I can find some of my excerpts from that, because there's specific scripts that we have to use over and over. Verbalizing. Play is the child's symbolic language of self-expression and can A, reveal what the child's experienced, B, reactions to what was experienced, C, feelings about what was experienced, D, what the child wishes, wants, or needs, and E, the child's perception of self. So through play, you learn to watch for those notes. Symbolic play, according to Piaget in 1962, play bridges the gap between concrete experience and abstract thought, and it's the symbolic function of play that is so important. Now, where's my notes on the scripting? I might have to pull out my actual folder for the scripts. Because there's very specific scripting that every time they want to draw you into the play, you're supposed to basically just redirect them into doing the activity and try not to distort their experience with your own perceptions and how it should be. Tenets. Here's 10 important tenets for relating to children. Children are not miniature adults. The therapist does not respond to them as if they were. Children are people. They are capable of experiencing deep emotional pain and joy. Children are unique and worthy of respect. The therapist prizes the uniqueness of each child and respects the person the child is. Number 4, children are resilient. Children possess a tremendous capacity to overcome obstacles and circumstances in their lives. Number 5, children have an inherent tendency toward growth and maturity. They possess an inner intuitive wisdom. Number 6, children are capable of positive self-direction. They are capable of dealing with their world in creative ways. Number 7, children's natural language is play. This is the medium of self-expression with which they are most comfortable. Number 8, children have a right to remain silent. The therapist respects a child's decision not to talk. Number 9, children will take the therapeutic experience to where they need it to be. The therapist does not attempt to determine when or how a child should play. Number 10, children's growth cannot be speeded up. The therapist recognizes this and is patient with the child's developmental process. And then it goes through and elaborates on each of those. Some children are like popcorn and some are like molasses. It's a fun phrase there.
Yeah.
Some children are like mushrooms. They pop forth overnight. Some are like orchids. They take 7 to 12 years to bloom. The effective play therapist is the kind of person who waits for orchids but is patient with mushrooms. Each child has a unique approach to the solution to problems and how life should be lived. Therefore, the child already possesses those qualities necessary for growing and becoming a well-adjusted, mature. Again, this is very much the positive psychology, Carl Rogers, etc. perspective. The child-centered play therapy, the play therapist's objective is to relate to the child in ways that will release the child's inner directional, constructive, forward-moving, creative, self-healing power. Let's see, it goes personality theory, self, child-centered view, blah, blah, blah. Growth, adjustment, maladjustment, growth conditions. Where is... Let's see if I've got it here in the table of contents, the scripts that we had to use. The scripts really, help really differentiate. Although you can you hear the differences between this and recreational therapy already? I mean, the concepts are the same between recreation and play therapy as far as the acceptance of the child and everything. But can you hear the difference in the approach?
Yeah, it's definitely unstructured.
Yeah, very rigidly structured in what the play therapist can and can't do, whereas the recreational therapist has a changing, broader role. They're both towards helping the child become more self-actualized, etc. But one is a very limited construct, and also doesn't work as much with, like a lot of the play therapy stuff was for working with more average children and children who've been through trauma and such, and less with children with significant disorders. Again,
right.
That can vary, but it's geared much more, as a lot of the positive psychology stuff, it's assuming there aren't major disorders getting in the way of normal development, and that through this process they'll get there. But when you have children with significant disorders, that doesn't always work out the same way. Let's see, where are those scripts? Maybe I just have them in my folder. Contact and okay, waiting room. Okay, so we've got a really specific, whole process. Here we go. Here's some of the scripting. Typical non-facilitative responses. These are scripts we had to memorize. The following excerpts from play therapy sessions are examples of typical responses that are not facilitative. How the therapist responds, the words used can make a significant difference in whether or not a child feels understood, accepted, or restricted. The suggested responses are just that. Suggestions are not intended to imply that these are the only responses that can be helpful. The objective here is to help you become aware of your own response pattern to children. So one is missed feelings. Child: do people come here lots? Excited voice, eagerness in face. Therapist: sometimes. Child is not asking for an answer. Suggested: you really like coming here. Recognizes feelings indicated. So you hear the difference? Do people come here lots? So the therapist might say sometimes, but they're not looking for an answer. So instead you say, you really like coming here. So you're stating what you think. So you're trying to interpret what they're saying. You do not do that as a recreational therapist in that way, right? That might be something you would do under very specific circumstances. But you see the big difference. My puppy got killed and I cried. Therapist: I'm sorry your puppy got killed. The therapist focuses on their own reaction, ignores the child's feelings, does not allow the child to explore her feelings further. Suggested: you were so sad about your puppy dying, you just felt like crying. Touches feelings and shows understanding.
Yeah, so that's some standard couch area and reflecting.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes through lots of examples. Labeling objects ahead of the room. So child, vroom, vroom, pushing block along on floor. Therapist, you're having fun with the car. The child has not identified the block as a car. The therapist is projecting an assumption. Child, that's not a car, that's a boat. Suggested. So instead what you should say is, that's sure making a lot of noise, avoids labeling block and says, I'm with you. So, or in my case, I would say instead, because to me that sounds more like I'm making a judgment if it's too noisy. So I would phrase it as, and we had to do this as exercises, I would say, that's sure making some vroom vroom noises, right? I would just reiterate what they're doing to show that I'm following along. But for me, that's sure making a lot of noise to me seems like that's coming across as, hey, that's sure making a lot of noise, right? For some kids might interpret it that way. So for me, when I went through this training, that was the difference that I did in the script, and the teacher's like, good point. So, but you get the idea how you want to show them that you're actively engaged, that you're paying attention to them, but you're trying really hard not to project your perceptions and let them do their own. So another example. Child places alligator puppet on their hand. So the therapist might do something like, now you have the alligator. Child has not identified the puppet. By naming the puppet, the therapist limits the child's creativity and structures possible play activity. Suggested. Now you put that one on. Allows the child to continue to lead and identify the puppet. So you're just describing what they just did. Oh, now you put that on your hand. Okay. What's next? Etc. Or not. You just see what happens. There's more examples like that. Evaluation and praise. Child. The child finds a comb and combs the hair of 2 dolls. Therapist. You're making them so pretty. Since children want to please, the child may continue the activity to get more praise. See, this is where it's so dangerous with therapists that they can... Remember what happened in the 80s with all of the... and this is related to what we were talking about earlier. All of the accusations about... child molesting that turned out that it was through suggestion of either therapists, police officers, and regression therapy and all of that. It turned out there were hundreds, if not thousands, of cases that weren't true because of the mistaken suggestiveness. The therapist or the cop or somebody or the parent said something, and the child, in wanting to please the adult, went along with it and then embellished and filled in the gaps, as our brains will do, and start believing it, even though it turned out not to be true. And thousands...
Memories are...
What's that?
They're actually cool, but they're extraordinarily rare.
What's that?
Recovered memories are possible, but extraordinarily rare.
Yes, but they were very popular in the 70s and 80s.
Actually, apparently, there have been some recent larger cases where apparently this is one problem in psychotherapy, is that since people don't typically have to receive continued training, you can get some really bad advice or some bad training as a therapist and then go on to perpetuate that.
Yes.
Meanwhile, science has moved way past this. Apparently that happened in some of the, in some recent high-profile cases of abuse. Some of the evidence, I guess, it might have been in the Sandusky. Don't quote me on that because I don't remember exactly. But lawyers were pushing for a retrial because a psychotherapist had used recovered memories or something.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
In those cases, there was a lot of corroboration with actual eyewitness testimony.
Right.
Like that,
yeah. It is a tricky thing because often there are real cases, but unfortunately, this suggestiveness, that's why training nowadays, you're supposed to be really careful. That's why it says, you're making them so pretty. Well, that's a suggestion, and they're going to want to placate that. So instead, what you're supposed to say, what's that? What was that?
Sure.
Are you?
Sorry.
You got a tickle going there. Okay. Well, you clear your throat. So what you're supposed to say is, you know how to comb their hair. So this reflects the child's ability rather than making a judgment as to how the results turn out.
Yeah, because children mirror very readily.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what it's all about. It's about modeling. And so that whole suggestibility is so critical. Now, that's a nice thing in rec therapy, for example. Our certifications expire if we don't keep up our continuing education units. And, a lot of professions have been doing that increasingly, where if you don't keep attending ongoing training, your certification expires. Or you have to retest under the new terms of the new test. It's about, I think it's every 5 years. If we don't keep up our CEUs, if we expire, we have to go take the whole new test, and the test changes, about every 3 to 5 years. Or if you're attending enough conferences, you get continuing education units. And then if you get enough of those, then you don't have to keep taking the test because you're getting the new information that's coming out as it's happening. And so that's how they keep rec therapists up with the constantly changing and evolving considerations. It's not foolproof by any means, but at least it's an important step in the right direction. Let's see. Inappropriate questions. So, child. Me and Courtney played house and goes into long discourse of activities, keeps mentioning Courtney. Therapist. Is Courtney one of your friends? Question meets the therapist's need. Whether or not Courtney is a friend is irrelevant. Suggested. Sounds like you and Courtney did lots of things together. This shows understanding of content and keeps the focus on the child. Big difference, huh? What's that?
Yeah. You can really see how this would pull away from what you would do for...
You cut out. What was that?
You can really tell how this would pull away from what you need to do in running an RPG.
Yeah, well, and with the role-playing game, that's a little bit different, scenario too. And, we use, like when we use No Thank You Evil with the younger kids, the 5 to 10-year-olds, that would be equivalent to this. We set up the story, and then they've got to play through the story within the stricture of the rules of the game and where they're allowed to go. They don't get to, it isn't completely freeform, right? That's why it's a game rather than just freeform play. It's got set rules, and it does have, certain direction and such to it. So there is a difference there with the role-playing game side. And in recreation therapy in general, there is some structure added to it. We pick a recreational activity that's appropriate to whatever there are. It's goals-oriented. So you can see how that is fundamentally different from the play therapy. The hope is that it will facilitate them towards growth, but there are no set goals. Recreation therapy, we have specific measurable goals, right? You hear me emphasize that all the time.
Right.
So it's a big difference from just casual play and versus play therapy. And they all have, right, their appropriate uses. These all have situations where they are of use with different populations and specific children and such. Here's one. This one is near and dear because of the whole violence thing related to games. Child routinely hits on Bobo, but with some vigor, no affect observable. So remember Bobo the clown, the whole study? Remember the Bobo the clown study?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so...
Classic.
Yeah, routinely hits on Bobo, but with some vigor, no affect observable. Therapist. How does it make you feel to hit Bobo? Inappropriate because no affect is observable. This implies to the child they should be feeling something. Suggested. A response is not needed to everything a child does in the playroom. That is significant, I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that makes it a little more clear as to just how non-directive you have to be.
Yep. Statements turned into questions. Okay, go ahead.
Totally not adding anything to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And going straight off of what they're doing.
Yep.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Showing that you are engaged and paying attention and interested, because they look at you. They're always either out of the corner of their eye or directly. They constantly monitor if you're paying attention to them, and they know when you're not paying attention. It's because you have to periodically take notes, but you have to do that very briefly. or you can just record video and do the notes later, which is preferred. And they're constantly watching, and you have to keep a flat affect. You have to not look happy or sad or do anything to reinforce one behavior more than another. You want to let them be in as neutral a space as possible for them to express themselves. If you show smiles for one behavior and flat affect for another, or frowns or concentration for another, they're going to react differently than if you keep a flat affect. Statements turn into questions.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Statements turn into questions.
Totally different than how they do that.
What's that?
If you do that in a therapy with adults, you will be fired.
Yes.
Never come back.
Exactly. And it's supposed to be a warm, supportive, caring environment, but you're not supposed to make it like, if you are going to smile at them, which is okay, you have to do that consistently, right? It has to be that there isn't any bias of one activity over another.
Right.
So you're always doing it in a warm, caring way so they feel safe. But you can't be giving them cues. It's like the whole horse that can do math thing, right? All of the tells that the horse learns from the trainer to be able to do math.
Right.
It's the same thing with children. You got to make sure you're not giving them tells that are skewing what they would normally do. Statements turn into questions. Child: the lightning's scary. Therapist: the lightning is a little scary. Use of the word little underplays the child's feeling, and the question at the end conveys that the therapist does not understand the child's feeling and has to check. Suggested: it scares you when there's lightning. Communicates understanding of feelings. So being very careful not to literally belittle. And it's these little subtle things that kids really pick up on very quickly. It's amazing. Leading the child. Child uses a plastic knife to scrape paint off a jar lid, works hard to scrape the paint off. Therapist: even though things are hard, you don't give up. The child will now have great difficulty in stopping, even if some of the paint is hard to get off, because she may fear the therapist will think she is giving up and will be disappointed in her. Suggested: you are working hard to get that off. Acknowledges the child's effort. So before said, even though things are hard, you don't give up, versus you are working hard to get that off.
Right, it's totally present-oriented.
Yep. Okay, acting out child and play therapy. I think I've made my point, though. And again, there's diagrams. You can always look up online the diagrams for how to lay out the rooms and such. They're very, very structured. And it's not that they're limited to that, but it is a highly structured thing. And the advantage of that is it makes doing certain types of research, right? You're controlling for that many more variables by having consistency to see if that modality is effective. And it is an effective modality for certain populations for certain needs. But it does, it has a limited scope, just as everything else does, and figuring out what that scope is very important. So was that useful to you as far as a clear understanding about play therapy? We can talk more about recreation therapy another time. But does that give you a clear...
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something I don't have clinical experience with. So
yeah, and I took it because I was like, well, how much is play therapy related to all this other stuff? And I was shocked how different it was. And I enjoyed it. I was really glad I went through the training and did the programs, and I saw some kids, it was great interacting with those kids, but it is a limited process. And it would be very problematic. It is extremely useful if you're trying to give insight to the parents about what's going on for a kid, right? If you get this and the kids start telling their stories, and you can have multiple kids in there interacting with each other. It doesn't have to be just one kid. And you can get some great insight into what's going on in the kid's head that you wouldn't be able to verbally. So it is really great for that. And then you can, talk with the parents about suggestions and help them with letting the kids address whatever the kids' frustrations are and challenges. But it is generally geared more for neurotypical kids as opposed to neuroatypical. Because how well is this going to work with somebody on the autism spectrum with a stereotype behavior who all they're going to do is stack? And it doesn't matter how many times you say,
Exactly.
you are stacking those blocks. You are stacking those, and it's just going to repeat over and over. And it's not going to be effective with that population. So you need to find a different modality, which we found with rec therapy and with role-playing game therapy. We're able to help them through that. So it is an important tool. But there are a lot of misconceptions about play therapy versus recreational therapy versus just play. And so I hope you found that a useful differentiator, at least on the play therapy side. I'll remind me next time, and we'll talk more about recreation therapy in the same because I don't think we have we, with you?
No, I mean, I can find it, but I don't think we've gone over it in quite that level of detail.
Great. And did you find that useful then for what we're doing here?
Totally.
Excellent.
Totally.
Excellent. All right.
I don't think I'll have a chance to get any training in that grad school, so that's very useful.
Hey, if you have any questions, let me know. I have folders of notes and experiences. I did it for about a year or so, pretty heavily, and it just became clear it wasn't where I wanted to go. But I when I go into stuff, I go pretty deep.
Yeah, I feel you.
All right. Well, anything else you want to cover before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
I could just have some blog posting to do or some writing to do. And
Yep.
Keep up on that. And I'll make some contact with some of the people I mentioned. Hopefully we can
Excellent.
get you connected to them.
Yeah. More of that, please. And does the Sunday thing look like it's going to work out well for you then? Better?
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
That's much better than Tuesday, at least for this half of the year.
Yeah, until it changes again.
Yeah, exactly.
Understood. And hopefully we get some of the others start moving over to the Sunday slot as well, so we'll get it a little more interactive. But glad you found it useful, and remember this was recorded, so I can make this available if you want to go back over it at any point. If you need to look stuff up, just let me know.
Yeah, excellent.
All right. Have a good one, and I will catch you online, but also next Sunday at the latest.
Okay,
all
totally.
Right.
Yep.
And
so good seeing you, and
you too.
Good luck recovering further from your
unfortunate
bump you had.
Yeah, a bimp in my head.
Yes.
Peter
yes.
Sellers.
And please, if you have any further symptoms, go to a neurologist or a hospital. Head injuries of any kind, especially after 40 of them.
Yeah, well, remember, I've worked a lot with a lot of brain injury.
I know you have.
And
yes.
It's so fascinating.
Sometimes that can be a bias, though.
Well, it is, but it's so fascinating because so far when I've had these injuries, the cognitive side of me that's the analytical side of me hasn't been impaired. So I'm always able to go into this, wow, that's interesting. I'm noticing this and this and this. I notice my affect is labile. I notice that I'm cracking jokes I wouldn't normally. Wow, my mood just swung from one to the other. Oh, wow, my equilibrium is like the full analytical dialogue is going the whole time I have this other impairment. Yeah. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, that happened during my meningitis, although.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I was just constantly like, wow, they gave me this medicine, and I'm just seeing Mickey Mouse when I close my eyes. That's interesting.
Fascinating.
Yes, that's very good data.
Yeah, no, the head injury, as far as I can tell, I've always had sleep dysregulation, so that's not a very good indicator for me, unfortunately. But as far as I can tell, I've recovered from the head injury part. My neck and spine are still recovering because the disc in my neck from that hit. But remember a year ago, January was when I had the really bad one. 2 days before I was on the Wizards of the Coast interview, I couldn't see the text or anything. I was seeing double. I was really messed up. And that lasted at least 3 months for the brain injury. That was a full moderate concussion. It was a bad one. And my back is still recovering. It's much, much better. And if it hadn't been for this incident 2 weeks ago, I'd barely be talking about it, but it re-aggravated the disc. Anyway, make the doors taller, darn it.
Yeah, you're living with hobbits.
I know. All right, well, thanks a lot. I hope you found it productive and excited about what we're working towards here. And I'll catch you later. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And if you have any comments or feedback or questions, please let us know. Remember, our researcher meetings now are on Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to noon Pacific time and Sundays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time on twitch.tv/RPG Research Live. Or if you're a Patreon supporter, and if you're not, why not? Help support our 501c3 and donate through patreon.com/RPG Research. Or there's other ways. If you go to rpgresearch.com/donate, you can donate through PayPal, Google's, Amazon Smile. Lots of ways to help out, or you can even volunteer. We hope you will. We are a 501c3 nonprofit studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and music and their potential to help improve lives. And if you found what we're doing useful and our site and on these videos, please do consider donating. Patreon supporters get access to these recorded videos and the blog postings at least a month or more before the general public. And it's our way of saying thank you to our donors, since we don't produce like sellable goods and such. That's our way of saying thank you. But wherever you may be well, happy gaming and namarie.